two forms of capital are particularly important. Critical infrastructural capital that underpin everything about production capabilities, plus human capital that accelerates production capabilities. We haven't done any of that. And here we are again, not able to pay salaries in at least 18 states of the country. The federal government is able to pay salaries, as we've seen, because it has embarked on massive borrowings from the domestic market, thereby crowding out the private sector. So in any way you look at it, we really found ourselves in a place that we should not have. If we had taken the right steps from the very beginning, while the oil was booming in revenues, at least in the last 5 years, oil prices held at an average of $100. And yet, what we face is a situation where we declined reserves and we almost eroded the excess crude account. It's unbelievable where we find ourselves. But enough for talking about the problem. I think the real issue is we're in dire straits. The workers who are not being paid in the various states of the country are very important to the extent that there are many families that depend on them. But that's not the only issue. The real issue is that the critical investment that you need to do in capital projects that have implications for the poor, you cannot do it. So that's going to increase poverty in the longer run, or medium to long term. And then that's going to also affect the scale of inequality that we're already dealing with. So solution time. Solution time means that the federal government has to lead an effort that would include all the governors and all the local governments, and the country basically has to have a conversation on the structure of our economy and what we need to do quickly, because some of the measures that government would need to take are not going to be easy measures. They're not going to be measures that would make the government popular with the people who are all expectant. So we really are in a situation where the strongest form and the firmest kind of leadership is needed.
All right, Madam, we agree. I mean, from some of the things that you talked about, the inactions and the actions of the political class in this sense might be blamed for the situation that we are in. And some people will be asking the question, the state government, how much blame can we put on them? Because if they have come far into this mess, shouldn't they have seen this and shouted louder than we've seen them shout before the people of the state get into this kind of situation?
Well, look, the whole thing about economic management is that sometimes people sort of assume that it travels off on its own. No, it doesn't. That's the whole concept of the political economy around which you do your economic management. And I do, one thing that you can say for the former Minister of Finance is that she was consistent in calling attention to the challenges of eroding whatever was supposed to be the rainy day fund that is known as the excess crude account. She did. The only thing that sort of detracts from what the federal government, from the leadership that the federal government tried to show in calling attention to that, was that equally the federal government did exactly the same thing as what the states did. If the federal government could show that its own portion of the distribution of federation money, that it had put away some significant savings, then it would have the moral pedestal on which to stand to sort of say, oh, the governors were completely reckless and therefore were not seeing that the signs were clear. Now, what is painful about our situation is that we actually could have envisaged this. Oil price variabilities constitute an external shock that can happen at any time, simply because we know the volatility of the global economy. It has hardly recovered from the recession that happened in 2008 up until about 2010-11. And so there it is so critical that we should really identify the underlying issues. And the underlying issues are, have to do with this inability to break out of a pattern of habitual addiction to free oil money. We need to break out of this. The kinds of policies that would make us break out of this will be forced on us. We have no choice. The truth is that there is no easy solution for the situation we're in. Look at each of the states that cannot pay salaries. We need to sort of scrutinize, and you could see the low levels. If you looked at their internally generated revenue as a percentage of their total revenue, you would see that it's so paltry. And because it is so paltry, you cannot sort of say that you're going to increase this in the shortest timeline. So what you need to look at is to look at the area of their costs. What are the costs that would go through some massive cutting? It's not going to be easy. You need to get them back to a place of some level of fiscal balance. And that's possible by looking at their revenue side and by looking at their cost side. In both cases, it's plenty of pain. But it's better to start now than to pretend that there is some bailout that would enable them solve the problem without taking the drastic kind of measures that they should have already taken when the times were good. When the times were good were really the time that important policies should have started in all of the states of the Federation. But, Seun, many of us don't pay attention to what happens to the other levels of government. Everybody's eyes would place on Abuja. And because everyone's looking to Abuja, the governors got away with, making the kinds of choices that should not ordinarily be made. I can imagine that, if anything I saw in some of these states is something to go by, there were some of these frivolous prestige projects that they embarked upon. Why did they need that? At the time they had those kinds of resources, those were the times to really invest in the things that drive economic growth. They could have invested in those critical infrastructure that would enable the diversification of their state economies. Every state has an economy. We haven't treated them that way. What we have currently in our society, in our nation, is that the state levels are revenue distribution units. They are revenue expenditure levels. That shouldn't be so. They should be generating a lot of revenue. They should be able to tell us, what the investment drive is, how much of that investment drive they've been able to succeed at, what kind of, enabling environment. I mean, when you look at the whole issue of the business climate in each of the states, some of them don't even care about it. They should, because small businesses can make a big difference. For the federal government, for instance, one of the ways it's going to have to, deal with some of its challenges, fiscal challenges, would be to look at the company income tax and to see how it can get in more payers.
Let me quickly come in here because we need to take a moment now. So that when we return, we'll continue with this conversation and we'll be looking at a bailout. But you will be talking to me when we return just how we can get out of this financial quagmire. That's right after now. Join us again.